Hello, Swift London. My name's Sam, and today I'm going to be talking about message apps or message extensions or whatever you kind of want to call them. I've entitled this a frantic arms flailing approach because I put a lot of content in the slideshow and kind of have realized that I might overrun, so I'm going to try and get through it as quickly as possible. So without further ado, as I said, my name's Sam Piggott. I recently left Dojo to go and start my own thing, which is basically like a little boutique studio. Dojo, if you're not aware of it, is like a city discovery app. It was like a startup formed about 2 years ago, and I basically headed up the iOS side of things there. I'm in possession of the single most war-torn MacBook in history, as demonstrated by my clicker this evening, which happens to be my keyboard. So there we go. So as I said, I'm going to be chatting about the Messages app. A little while ago, a couple of months ago, I basically built an app called Combo FM, which is like a music discovery app. And because it was our own pet project, we kind of had the opportunity to experiment with the message extension. So I kind of dived in a little bit earlier. And it kind of really surprised me as to what the potential and possibilities that could be done with the Messages framework, I guess. So I sort of collated all the information that I kind of had on it as I was building stuff with it, and then turned it into a presentation, and hopefully it should be relatively interesting today. So cool. So starting from the top, what exactly is a message extension? So a message extension takes the form of one of three things. It can be an extension of an existing app, as demonstrated with Airbnb's extension that they put out, pretty much in time with the release of iOS 10. It's a really, really good example. If you've not tried any kind of message extensions or anything like that, the Airbnb one's really, really good because you can basically sort of kind of build holidays with other people. It's like a really, really good usage of the message kit. It means you don't have to dive in and out of the app. You can basically just open the widget and all the info's there, which is really cool. So that's an example of the extension of an existing app. One of the really exciting things about it is the fact it can also have standalone message apps. And one of the best examples of that I've kind of pulled up here is Game Pigeon, which got featured all over the place as soon as iOS 10 came out. One of the things that really surprised me and got me really excited about the framework in the first state was the fact that this kind of looked like it was using SpriteKit or something along those lines, and that gave me kind of a bit of an insight as to, I guess, like the possibilities of what could be done with the framework. So that's two of them, and then the third one is stickers. And the less said about those, the better. So I'm just going to move swiftly on. So let's talk about message apps. So this talk is going to be more directed about the actual message app side of things rather than extensions of other things. We're going to be talking about standalone apps. So starting from the top, what exactly can they do? The top line that I've kind of given it is providing a custom interface to create messages to send in conversations, which in layman's terms is basically filling this box with something that the user can then send off however they want to. A better way of explaining what the iMessage message extensions can't do is you can't actually reach into this field and grab the text directly from it, which was something that I kind of hoped that you could do. So building like a translation app or something like that, where you could fill that sort of field up and then translate it, and everything would sort of get sorted for you. That's actually not possible. You can populate it with new messages, but you can't actually sort of dive in and grab data from that. And like I said a minute ago, you actually need confirmation from the user before anything gets sent. So the user has basically the final say as to whether the message that you populate in that, I guess, that little kind of text field will get sent or not. Cool. Why should you give it a try? Again, like tons of accessible APIs. I mean, obviously these are going to be a little bit more on the limited side of things, but in terms of exactly what was possible with it, really sort of blew my mind when I was experimenting with it. One of the things that really surprised me is the fact that you can actually access the camera with it, and so that's not limited to like the expanded view either. You can actually sort of operate or access the camera from the compact view as well, which felt a little bit intrusive at times, but it's quite exciting to see exactly what could be done with it. As with most extensions as well, you can share data with the parent app, which is really cool, and get a head start bowing down to our future WeChat overlord, as all future apps could potentially be message apps. Cool. So message app layout. So there, as I mentioned a minute ago, we basically have like two states. You have compact and expanded. And so laying out like message apps is like fairly straightforward because you can bring your own desired layout method. So if that's like frames, auto layout, UI stack view, or storyboards if you're that way inclined. Sorry, I feel really bad because there's a dig, and there's going to be a storyboards talk in a minute. So, and one of the more important things as well is because the Messages app works in both portrait and landscape modes, it's really important to make sure that the layout does support landscape too. Cool. So when you basically build your or create your first iMessage app, you'll be presented with the MSMessages app view controller, or an instance of that anyway, which is a bit of a mouthful. I've kind of gone over a couple of the core properties, or some of the properties that we're going to be going over in this talk today, which includes like the conversation, how we access or identify all the users within the conversation, the message, which gives context and helps you understand where people are in the conversation, and then on top of that, you kind of have all of the properties which are part of that message object too, so session, URL, and layout. So starting from the top, you can the MS conversation object identifies you. It identifies everyone else in the room with UUIDs. Unfortunately, as great as it would be, it isn't just an array of message objects. You can only have access to the last selected object, the last selected message, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail. But that's kind of how data is passed through basically passed to and from the message apps or message extensions. You effectively have one message which takes data from the previous message, mutates it, and then passes it forward in a new one. So the way to look at the MS message object is kind of the model layer. You can pass data, like I said, you can pass data back and forward through the URL property. The MS message object also has a layout property, which takes an MSMessage TemplateLayout object, which is kind of the nice way of kind of seeing it is like kind of like the view model. It gives you the ability to basically change the image, the caption, subcaption, basically what the actual message ends up looking like. So, and the cool thing about it as well is, I think Facebook did a really good job of it. They basically showed off that you can actually change that image to a video too, which is cool, which also plays. So, the last thing that we're going to go over in terms of architecture is the MSSession. So you can't actually create an MS message object without an MSSession object as part of it. And as you can see from this kind of little diagram here, you've got three messages that have been passed back and forward. So user A has sent a message, user B has then sent a message, and then user A has then created a message. And as you can see, there's only one which is actually sort of large, kind of, well, basically tappable, because that means that the latest one, or the biggest one that's at the end of that session or the end of that group is the one that's going to have the freshest data. And so it's important to make sure that these other messages aren't clickable, because then we'd be getting outdated context. Cool. And a couple of gotchas. So like I said, I've been building a couple of, mainly just experimenting with the message framework, but I've kind of identified a couple of little bits and pieces along the way. Currently, when you're sort of building stuff in the simulator, you have access to John and Kate, I believe. They both have the same UUID. So I was building like a turn-based sort of little mini game. And it was obviously really important to actually identify who the current player was. And unfortunately, both of them return the same UUID. A radar has been filed for it, so hopefully that'll be something that gets fixed in a future version. Depending on a UUID probably isn't the best idea, because deleting and reinstalling the extension will give you a brand new one. With that said, for sort of like short-term and temporary usage, it's fine to sort of depend on them. And if it wasn't already clear, no horizontal swipe gestures in compact mode, because, well, they won't work, because you're going to be swiping left and right anyway between selecting the message apps. Cool. Right, that was a lot of knowledge. So we're going to basically take all of that information that I've kind of put together and create something interesting with it. I haven't got, I don't have any confidence to actually do some live coding, so we're just going to be going through snippets as fast as possible. Attention. fablemaker 3000. So this is my little like a demonstration of a little app that we could basically build with the messages tool framework. The concept is it's kind of like that game that you may or may not have played when you were in school, which is kind of like you'd have an A4 piece of paper, you'd write like the line of a story, and then you fold it over, and then you could only see the last line of a story, fold it over again, and at the end you unfold it, and you get this sort of big, sort of convoluted, messy story, but is pretty funny. So the concept of the entire game was to make sure that the context sort of keeps on being passed forward, but the last sentence is the only thing that the user can see. So to give you a rundown of the 3 layouts that I kind of put together, you've got a compact view, a new story view, and a resume story view. The compact view is going to be solely used for exactly what it sounds like, which is going to be in the compact state. The new story view and resume story view will appear dependent on whether the user has expanded the view for one thing, and if they've expanded it through selecting a message within the conversation, i.e. they want to continue the story and continue the session that we've already created. Cool. So as you can see, the MSMessages app view controller that you get is actually just a subclass of UI view controller. So we can treat it the same way, or basically sort of, treat it the same way that we would any other sort of, UI view controller. As you can see, all I've done here is change the background color, added a couple of subviews, and I've added I've basically just added a function there, which, is a UI tap gesture recognizer, which takes us to a function which is for the tapped mini screen gesture. I'm trying to remember what that does. When you tap on that, that will basically force the extension to go from compact to expanded mode. And that's kind of roughly sort of what we would get. So if the user then goes ahead and actually taps on that view, like we set up in the tap gesture recognizer, a ton of methods on the MSMessages app view controller are called, but the important one that we're going to sort of focus on is the will become active and the did become active method. So at this point, we can actually check to see if the selected message exists. If the selected message isn't nil, then we can assume that the user has opened the extension by tapping on a message in their conversation. Otherwise, we can assume that they've opened it by tapping on that little arrow in the bottom right-hand corner, or have invoked it using the method that we set up. And so with all that, I've basically, for simplicity's sake, I've just hidden and shown the views accordingly. So if we check for the presentation style, if it's expanded, then it's going to be resume story view or the new story view. Otherwise, it's just going to be the mini screen view that we set up at the start. And again, like I said, we're going to check to see if the selected message property exists. If it does, then we're basically going to want to continue the story. So we're going to show the resume story view. Otherwise, we're going to assume it's a new story, so we're going to show that one instead. Cool. So now that I've tapped on that and we've sort of expanded the message, I guess like the message extension to its full glory, we can now actually create the title of our story, which is going to be The Curse of the Unresponsive Audience, which seems fitting. So we're going to click on Start the Story, and now I'm basically going to go through a very, very I guess just a very, very quick sort of run through as to exactly what happens next. So we create an MS message, and because it's a new story, we're going to give it a brand new MSSession object. We're going to create a URL object, and I've just written the string out here with the game settings as query parameters. So as you can see, I've got the story title as a key and the story's title as a value. For simplicity's sake, I've written out the URL here, but obviously, and Apple's docs actually recommend that you use the URL query items instead. It's much easier to manage and means that you don't have to do all the sort of like string interpolation and all that kind of stuff. So yeah. So once you've done that, we can now actually create MSMessage TemplateLayout objects, which, as I mentioned earlier on, kind of serves as our view model. I've set a caption and a subcaption just to basically encourage people to tap on the message to continue the story. Pass those to the MSMessage object with that new session that we set earlier on, or created earlier on. And then on the active conversation object, we can actually just go ahead and send it from the MSMessages app view controller. It's basically just a method which is insert the message, and then once that has gone through, we then request the presentation style to be compact, so that the user can then check the message, and then send it off if they want to. So that's kind of the final kind of, the final kind of message. Like I said, user has last say as to whether they do or don't send it. And so if they hit the cross, it'll disappear from the window. Otherwise, they can hit the send message, and it'll go into the conversation. So as well as that, the layout object actually takes an image property, and here I've basically just sort of set up a little example as to what could be possible. Setting up a view, screenshotting the view, and then exporting an image, a UI image object out of the back of that, and returning that image. And another cool thing as well that you can kind of do with this is by prefixing the UUID, it will actually sort of interpolate that for you and give you the name of the user that the UUID applies to, rather than just a long string of letters and numbers. And so with all of that in mind, that's the kind of, I guess, like the sort of end message that we've received. So we're now Kate, who is the recipient of this message, and Kate has now tapped on this. We've now, because of all the logic that we set up earlier on, the resume story view is now actually active. And so if we go ahead and basically add a sentence, fill that in, we then go through a really, really similar position as sort of situation that we just literally went through, which is where first we basically grab the session and the URL object from the selected message. So we need that session to make sure that, to pass that forward, to make sure that all of those messages collapse. And then we copy and mutate the URL. So this time I've just added a new key value property, which is the story so far, with the string which Kate has added in. We can then just create a new MSMessage object, pass it the session and the new URL and a layout from, I guess, a layout creator that we would have set up earlier, which creates a very, very similar layout to the previous message that we sent. We can then just send it off again using exactly the same method. And with all of that, as you can see, because we've retained the session, the last message gets collapsed. The story will continue, and when me, as John, taps on this little message just down here, that will then have all of the updated data that we want. And just as like a final sort of final bit, I guess, if we would tap on finish the story, what we could do is basically take all the data from the story so far key and spit it out into the conversation. And yeah, that's everything. So hopefully that was like a fairly, I guess, like interesting sort of approach to the messages framework. I know I've gone through things pretty quickly, so if there's any sort of questions or anything that you have, and we have time for that, then I think we can go through those now. Otherwise, you're more than welcome to grab the slides off of me at the end. Cool. Thanks very much.